All right, we are going to get started because everyone's time is valuable. Welcome to Training Tuesday. I am Bill Brown, the Director of Innovative Evangelism from the Baltimore-Washington Conference. It is a joy to welcome members of both the Peninsula Delaware Conference and the Baltimore-Washington Conference to our Training Tuesday tonight. A couple of housekeeping things before we open with a word of prayer. A couple of housekeeping. If you have a question or comment for our presenters during tonight's broadcast, please use the Q&A feature. You can find that in your Zoom toolbar, and we'll get to questions throughout the evening. And tonight's broadcast is being recorded, and all of the slides that are being shared will be made available to everyone. So don't worry if you miss a note or if you don't catch something. We will post those to both websites of both annual conferences later this week. So you can pay attention, you can take notes. We'll also have a couple of polls throughout the evening, so you'll need to be ready to answer polls. I think that is all of my housekeeping. So if you would all bow your heads with me for a word of prayer, and even though you don't think I can see you, I know if you'll have your heads bowed. So let us pray together. Almighty and holy God, we give you thanks for gathering us together from around our various annual conferences into this sacred space. We know your Spirit is present. We know that you have prepared us for tonight, and we give you thanks. We thank you for the staff of Bethany United Methodist Church and for their willingness to say yes, to be presenters tonight, to share with us how they are engaging people in the midst of a challenging time. So may your Spirit give us wisdom, insight, and understanding as we gather to learn a new thing. We pray this all in the name of Jesus. Amen. We are blessed to have with us the clergy and staff from Bethany United Methodist Church in Ellicott City, Andrew Cooney and Brenda Lewis and Kathy Viddick and Matthew Jenkins. And without further ado, I'm going to turn the evening over to our presenters. Andrew and team, welcome and thank you very much.
Thanks for having us. We're grateful to you, Bill, for having us on tonight. So welcome. We're going to take just a minute to introduce ourselves, and then we'll get into our talk tonight. My name is Andrew Cooney, as Bill said. I've been at Bethany for 8 years now. It's a suburban church just outside of downtown Ellicott City. Some of you may be familiar with Ellicott City because of the floods that we had over the past several years. It kind of put us on the map for that reason. And so I've had the privilege of serving here with my colleagues, and it's been a great joy. And as it has been for many of you, a challenge for the past couple of years, leading through COVID. And so one of my roles is the chair of the nominations committee. And so Bill spoke to me about mobilizing the laity, which is, of course, one way of doing that. But that's not the only way. And so I invited some of the other folks on our team to come along because they're involved in other ministry areas, and they also have to mobilize laity in ways that are equally important. So Pastor Brenda, why don't you take a moment to talk about yourself and your ministry?
Sure, thank you. I'm Brenda Lewis, and I'm the associate pastor at Bethany, and I am now in my 4th year of being in partnership with the clergy and staff at Bethany, and it's been a joy to be at this particular suburban location. Part of my responsibilities is that of community development as well as outreach. And so during the times of COVID, it requires some creativity as well as some stretching and imagining in ways that we had not thought of before. But the beauty of it is that as the body of Christ, we are still yearning and seeking ways to be used by God. And so this presented an opportunity to be able to do that with the laity as well as staff.
Go ahead, Pastor Kathy.
Hi, friends. My name is Kathy Viddick, and I get to be the kids and family ministry pastor at Bethany. I've served in that role for since 2015, and Bethany is actually my home church, so I have kind of a different perspective because I've always been at Bethany and only ever been appointed there. So as the kids and family ministry pastor, like every other church leader, we had to pivot and figure out how to engage kids and families in a way that's meaningful during the season. And now even as we are re-engaging volunteers, inviting kids back on campus to engage in activities, and the leadership of those activities, we have to consider how we are reaching out to people and what kinds of things we're planning to do.
All right, Matthew, would you like to take a moment to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello. My name is Matthew Jenkins, and I have the privilege of serving at Bethany. I've been here for two years. I guess this coming April will be 3 years, and they Bethany, the Bethany family, my Bethany family would say that I joined Bethany at the right time, and to be able to serve the church in the capacity that I have. And I would say to my Bethany family that they were entered into my life at the right time, the way they've been able to, the way that they have blessed my family. And it's just been a wonderful experience, especially through COVID. Ministry became increasingly challenging, discovering new ways to serve people and to get worship, to provide worship for people in their homes. But I thank God for the team that we have here and the leadership of Pastor Andrew, who certainly pushes us. He challenges us. And not only does he challenge us, but he also cares for us deeply. And I thank him. And I thank all of the staff here at Bethany. And it's been a wonderful experience.
So Matthew not only leads worship for us, but he also helps with technology, sound, builds teams around all that stuff, and was huge in helping us to get online we weren't online before COVID. So Matthew, the first Sunday, was able to get us online and to get us moving. And that was just a major blessing to us. So in a setting like this, where the room is this big, we don't have the opportunity to ask you specifically who you are, but we did set up some poll questions so that we could get a sense of who we are as a total community. So Bill, I'd like to ask you if you'd put up the first poll question for us so people can answer that. And that's, what's your context, so that we can kind of get a sense of who you are and where you're serving. If you could share with us what context you're serving in right now, that would be a huge help to us on the panel. So I think you just click the choice and then hit vote or send.
We'll give people a few minutes. We're at about 80% participation on the poll.
I have served in both rural and suburban settings, and the staff here has served in various settings as well. So we are appreciative of the different challenges that happen in the different settings that we as pastors have to minister in. Okay, 48% rural, 22% urban, and 30% choice suburban. So an interesting mix for us, really. And like I said, we as a team are really familiar with those different environments. So if you have specific questions that you feel like we can help you with regard to those settings, we do have background in them, even if we're not serving in them right now. I think the next question we wanted to ask to get a sense of the group was also kind of where you were in worship pre-COVID. Right now, it's almost impossible to get a sense of where we truly are. So Bill just kind of set this up. He grabbed those numbers and put them in there. And if you just give us a sense of what your attendance was pre-COVID, on average, that'll also give us a sense of some of the challenges that you face, because different churches of different sizes will face different challenges. It's just part of the natural thing. And the way that we can serve you best is by understanding what your challenges might be and how we can serve you in those ways. And how we doing, Bill?
This is a good group. We've got 90% participation, so we're going to end this poll.
Okay. So about half are 0 to 50, and 33% are 50 to 1 to 100. And then the rest, so that's what, 15, 16, 17% or so would be 100 or over, which would be pretty typical of United Methodist churches, kind of for us around our nation. So it's really helpful to know that so that we can know how best to talk to you about the challenges that you face. The next question we had was also kind of a contemporary question, and that is, how are you holding your worship services? And some people are still just online, and some people are just in person, and some people are hybrid. So we wanted to ask you that one of the questions to get a sense of where you are in your worship experience. So if you'd answer this one and one more for us, that would help us to kind of complete as a group where you are. And so if you're online only or in person only or hybrid, and of course, there are many different ways to be online these days. Some folks chose to do Zoom, and other folks Facebook or YouTube or other platforms, and they each have their own blessings and challenges to them, as we've discovered along the way. We've tried a couple different ones. So you may have experience in those as well. And we appreciate your willingness to share with us and participate. 90% is a pretty high. I didn't expect you to have that kind of compliance, Bill. That's fantastic.
We have some of the best audience of any church or conference weekly broadcast around training in the country.
You're running for DS, aren't you?
No. We're at 93% participation, Andrew, so we're going to close this poll out.
Okay, so 30% are online only, 16% are in person only, and 55% are hybrid. So those of you that are hybrid know the unique challenges of trying to balance both things at the same time. And, later on, you can listen to Matt talk about the challenges of trying to install a brand new soundboard and run it simultaneously for both the in-person and the internet, as well as training people to do that. It's God bless people that enjoy trying to figure that stuff out. So our last question for you has to do with kind of where you feel like your congregation is. And since many of you are meeting in person or of hybrid, you might have a real honest sense of this, but we're really looking for what level of engagement you're seeing in your people. And churches are all across the spectrum on this one. There are some folks who are experiencing churches that are higher in their participation than before COVID, and some that are far lower. And so, Bill, would you put that last poll for us? And this will be our last question that we'll be asking you this evening. What is your level of congregational engagement as you reach this particular point in time? And it's a good time to ask, because as we come to the holidays, you might be seeing a slight uptick in some of this. As people become, more interested, you're going to have your normal Christmas and Easter folk that are starting to pop their heads in. And that may affect some of what you're seeing. But, just as the numbers change and as time goes on, you may be seeing a development in this. So let us know what level you're at, and then we'll go from there. So where are we at in terms of poll answers?
We're already at 88% participation. Oh, just click the 90.
All right.
Give people a few moments. 95%, I'll tell you. You're just asking great questions that people want to answer.
That must be it. That must be it.
All right, we're at 95% participation. We're going to close out this poll.
Yeah, I don't think we should set our expectations higher than that. You and I would be the kind of people that would just try and spoil those numbers, Bill. 49% are lower. Okay. 22% are the same. And 29% are higher. So that's fantastic that 29% of you are higher, a third are higher. That's quite beautiful. And it's quite natural that, I would probably put us very definitely in the lower than pre-COVID engagement, in the sense that, there was a time early on where a whole bunch of people watched us online. And as we went back, there's been a real drop off on those numbers. And so it's hard for us to know, especially since we don't use Zoom, we use Facebook and YouTube. We don't always know exactly how many people watch it later on, and what that actual level of engagement is. And that's, people tell us all the time. Pastor Brenda makes calls all the time to folks, and they say, "I'm watching." Don't they tell you that, Pastor Brenda? And we try and believe them. We try and believe them. So here's what we want to do tonight. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to give you an overview of what we're going to do tonight as we walk through this. What's on screen is kind of a map of tonight, and the content of this will be given to Bill and his folks, and they will put this on a website that you can access to have every bit of this stuff. So for those of you who are interested, I'm sure there's some techie folks among us. This is a very simple app. It's very cheap. It's called Mindly, Mindly. And it just simply uses circles to map stuff out. And I tend to be a bit of a visual person. So it's helpful for me to kind of see the landscape of this, to understand a talk or a presentation, to kind of know where they're going, and sometimes to say, are they done yet or not? So we did the first one, Where Are You? And we walked through some very specific places. And underneath all these are a whole bunch of other circles that I'll show you in a minute. We're then going to talk about the old reality, kind of pre-COVID, because I think getting our head around how the reality was at the time is important to understand the contrast as to how it is now and what that means. Then we're going to talk about the old rules about mobilizing the laity. How did that used to happen? And then we're going to talk about what we have learned about the new realities. And we're not claiming that we have identified, or that we all have the same old realities or old rules, or that we know all the new realities. We're just telling you what we've learned. We're just trying to share with you kind of what we've gleaned along the way through both successes and failures, just trying a lot of stuff. And then finally, we'll land on the new rules that we have come to believe are some of the things that are beginning to work for us in mobilizing the laity. So we are going to walk through these. We've done number one. We're going to walk through these areas and talk about them and interact with them. So the first two areas we're going to be moving through a little bit more quickly, because we just want to get an overview and a sense of what they are. And I'll be talking through those areas to give you that stuff. And then as we move into the other areas, we'll be engaging the other staff. But I'll be asking them along the way, maybe even to share some stories and some thoughts that will help flesh some of this out. So let me open this up. This is what I would call some of the old reality of COVID, before COVID, excuse me. How the church operated in as previously as 3 or 4 years ago, but even sometimes earlier than that. So the first thing I want to lift up, it says number one there, is that the church had a unique priority in many people's lives. We were, for many people, a unique kind of organization that had a special place in people's hearts. And because of that part of it, and because of culture at large, they made us a priority. Now, when I was growing up, it was even more so. So I'm sure that's for many of you as well. But church, and that's in part because there wasn't a lot to do on a Sunday morning, right? So the mall wasn't open. You couldn't shop on Amazon. So church had a sense of priority, and people were coming regularly. And many of you know that before COVID even hit us, we were seeing a decline in the regularity of people attending, which was eroding the unique priority that the church had. The second thing is that there was still kind of this sense of it's an honor and a privilege to serve the church and to be in a position on the church. And so there for many people was a sense that when you asked them to do something, when you either nominated them, or if you're in children's ministry or any missions, when you asked somebody to do something, it took it as a real piece of honor and a privilege, rather than saying, is this really one more thing I have to do in life? Now, if we're honest with ourselves, we were starting to feel some of that wane a bit, and we were starting to feel people saying my life is very busy and all of that. The next thing is we were certainly seeing, even before COVID hit us, a shrinking number of servants. That the number of people who were willing and able to serve was certainly going down. And sometimes that was because of the age of our congregation, and sometimes that was because of people's work schedule. 20 years ago or so, when it was more, when there were more one-income households, you had less of this, but the world has become busy. The third thing, or the next thing, is that volunteers were key and still are, but we tried to make them an important centerpiece to things happening. And so as a result of that, people, we would celebrate volunteers in church on Sunday and give awards and those kinds of things to help them understand the significance of the work that they do. The last two things that I would look before you that were part of the old reality were that for many of us, our congregations were getting older. Now, truth be told, Bethany is probably a younger congregation than some of you that are here. And that's why we have, a children's ministry pastor, was because we are able to attract younger families. But even still, we have an enormous number of people that are older, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. The group of people that are in their 70s and 80s and 90s in Bethany is a pretty substantial group of folks. And so that was a reality that we were beginning to bump up against. And the last piece was that in almost every church I've served in, we had what I like to call unpaid staff. They were one or two, sometimes more individuals. They weren't on staff, but they thought they were. And so they just hung around and did things. And they were there at the church a lot. I mean, they were, if the doors were open, there was a chance they were there. And sometimes it was fixing things in the property. Sometimes it was folks in the kitchen. Oftentimes, a lot of people in the kitchen spend a lot of hours at the church serving and helping. Sometimes it's people that help with worship. It could be any number of categories, but these are the kinds of things that help make up the old reality for what we saw as pre-COVID. So I'm going to give an opportunity. Pastor Brenda, one of the things that we saw as we started moving into COVID was the challenge of a group of people that many of us have that are in their 70s, 80s, and even 90s, who were especially vulnerable when COVID came in. And they've had some strong reactions. You want to talk about that for just a minute?
So that time was a challenging time because for a good segment of that population, the church was their family. They were either widows, widowers, or they had medical conditions that required them to move into a different living environment. So therefore, their network was limited prior to COVID. And when COVID set in, it was even more limited. Many of them had challenges in just being or feeling connected. And so one of the things that we did was we decided that we needed to keep them engaged. They needed to feel like they were a part so that they did not fall into a place of either feeling alone and forgotten, most of all. And so we did canvas calls. We made calls to the congregation, and we had that group of individuals that we made even more frequent phone calls with. We also provided opportunities for them to still be engaged because some of them were a part of a group that we called Vintage Vibes. And even though this particular group is from 70 to 100, there are some individuals who do not care for the title of senior or older. And so they came up with their own name for their group. And we just said it was anyone who was 50 and above who were spirit-filled and loved fellowship. And so we were doing that prior to COVID. And so one of the things we were able to do was to change that and now offer them that engagement and fellowship virtually, which was very helpful for many of them. And then the other things that we were able to do, in addition to having regular phone calls, was also to still deliver little goodie bags to them, especially during the holidays, that they would have little treats and things that they would also be able to share as they talk to one another or as we had our virtual gatherings. So that was some of the things that we were able to do to make sure that this particular population was still connected and engaged with the church.
And we had some really interesting conversations about who we thought would come back first, because the older population was vaccinated first. And we thought for a little while that they were gonna come back in mass and beat all the families. And they didn't come back at the same pace we thought they would.
No. And that's what a lot of people thought, because they had received the vaccine first, that they would be the first ones back. However, in talking with them on a regular basis, they would share with me, I'm not ready yet. I know I've been vaccinated. I want to see how things are going. And once I become a little more comfortable, then I'll start to make my way back. Part of that required some creative thinking, if you will, and coming up with ways for them to feel comfortable. And one of the things that I recognized during this time was that not everyone's comfort level was at the same place. And so it was also being able to honor them where they were, come up with a creative way that they felt that their concerns had been heard and taken into account. And so one of those was doing a smaller gathering. And we love to eat. So when you have food and you have it during a prime time, then people have a greater tendency to attend, especially if you're able to call a friend and see whether they're going to be there. And so we had a small in-person vintage vibes gathering. Tables were safely distanced from one another. The seating at the tables were limited. We also made sure that the meal was one that was pretty much prepackaged but tasty, and also so that it was fun, doing some of the things that they enjoyed prior to COVID during that time. That became our launching pad for them to begin to make their way back to the worship experience.
Yeah. And Pastor Kathy, you have had some interesting experiences, because it wasn't until this past Sunday that your children's ministry, because of Advent, really jumped, because the families have really, in this area, have really wrestled. And we thought that when school came back and kids had to be in school, that would just be the door that fixed it. And it wasn't.
No, it wasn't at all, because parents were concerned about the additional exposure to groups that change from week to week, because we don't assign kids to a certain space every week. And so it really, this week, I felt like there were several families who came for the first time since we shut down for COVID, because their kids had been vaccinated for the first time.
Yeah. And Matthew, you found that actually some of the techies were, they were unafraid in general.
Yeah, yes, I think that's true. More so, even less afraid than the band members. I think too that it helps when you have new equipment. I think when you can get people excited about the new things that you're doing, it kind of challenges them. It rallies them. And I think I was able to do that with our team, is kind of get them excited about the new soundboard, some of the new programs that we're running now. And just kind of, and I didn't put all that together myself. I invited them into the process, and in doing that, I got their buy-in. I was asking questions about, hey, should we use this? What do you guys think about this? Just getting a feel for where they were, and not just making decisions without them. So.
And that's young and older too. I mean, you have kids in high school serving in technology, all the way up through, people in their I don't, not right now, we probably don't have anybody much older than their 60s.
Yes, yes, and what I've, and actually with some of these programs that we're using now, I mean, people like Eric Cahoon, who's older than, he has three sons, three teenage boys. But he is, just as knowledgeable about, using computers and running sound as any of the young people, and he's able to not only run things, but he's able to train as well because he has that wisdom and that experience.
Which was another interesting thing because you also sometimes got whole families to serve.
Yes, yes, and it's and I've just loved it. Even I've got a mom back there every once in a while, just kind of sitting back there learning and giving a helping hand. Caitlin Rice, when she was back from college, her mom was back there. It's pretty cool just seeing the parents just kind of be back there for support for their children. It's just been it's been good. It's been pretty good.
Yeah. So in a minute, we're gonna pause for some Q&A. I saw that Bill put that up there. I want to go back and share my screen to talk about the old rules that I think that we were kind of serving under. And then we will take a pause and answer any questions, and then we'll move on to some of the new stuff that I've heard some of them talk about already. So let me go to the second square, and that's the old rules here. And so what many churches would do is, they would look for people's passion and gifts, right? I mean, it's pretty natural. Now, I have served in smaller churches, and, it's harder because you have a smaller group to pull from, and you don't always have folks that have the gift or the passion that you want. And so you do find yourself moving to a place, and you don't want to say it out loud, but inside of you, you're like, I just need to get somebody on the SPRC. I just have to fill a slot. And so that's, it's not ideal, but that's where, we were and still are in some cases. So that's but as best we could, we tried to be faithful to find people's gifts and their passions. Then the next thing was, there were what we would consider ideal servants. So for me, that could be a couple different things, right? The first would be that there was a whole group of people that walked into the church looking for something to do. Like, they would walk in as a visitor, visiting your church, and they'd be there a couple Sundays, and then suddenly you'd find out that they wanted to join the choir, or that they were asking about how to help in missions. And it wasn't everybody, but as a pastor, you kind of just pray that kind of person will walk into your church. And there were other people who were just ready to serve. I mean, they weren't coming to you asking, but you could tell that they felt a home in your church, and they were, if you would ask them, then they were ready to help you. And then, of course, there's the lifelong United Methodist. Pastor Brenda and I had a time after church on Sunday where we had some new folks that had come. They were parents of a member of ours, so they were later in their years, in their late 60s, early 70s, mid 70s, and lifelong United Methodists. And he said at the end of our time together, I have a passion to help with things like sound. If I can help you, I'd love to do that. So, that is music to our ears sometimes. And then you have people that sometimes walk in that have a number of gifts. They could serve. You wish that you could put them on many of your committees because they could do well in any of it. And then finally, the 80-20 rule, which is, 80% of the work is done by 20% of the people. And that 20% sometimes, shows up, and you are just like, thank you, Jesus, because you help to keep us moving forward. And so you have a group of ideal servants that we look for. The third thing is, to a degree, there was some of this ask them and they'll help, just an overall kind of people that weren't necessarily looking for things, but had good hearts, cared about their leaders and their church, wanted to see things happen. And even if they weren't eager, and they may not have even been on the surface super willing, but they would do it. Ask them and they will come. And the last is what I call a leadership pipeline. And a leadership pipeline is when you're in a place as a church where you can begin to develop leaders. So you might do that by, for example, inviting someone to be a part of a Bible study, right? And then you're in that Bible study and you're watching them and you're seeing how they fit into community and how they interact and if they work well with other people. So maybe after that you invite them to serve, on a committee somewhere and watch how they serve there. And if they interact well, maybe they're asked to be the vice chairman of a place, and then maybe later on they're a chairperson, and then you see if they'd be willing to be a lay speaker or a lay reader, and you kind of walk them through that process. And that's a lot of how we were doing things before COVID, that leadership pipeline that we were about. And those are the kinds of rules, of opportunities that we would take as we were living under the time of COVID. So I'm going to take a moment to stop here and to ask Bill, are there questions or things that we need to address at this point in time before we head to the newer stuff?
Well, first is thank you for the flashback memory of my very first nominating committee meeting as a pastor, Andrew, where we sat in the church kitchen with the church directory and just started flipping through it until we could find people who would serve. And then the patriarch of the church would go through the list and say, nope, they haven't been here long enough. They've only been here 10 years. Nope, they're too young. So thank you for that little bit of a shocking flashback. The only question we have right now is for Matthew. One of our participants would like to get your contact information for a possible youth training purpose at their church.
You're muted, Matthew.
So how about I share, you're going to get an onslaught. I'm going to, if I share Bethany's website and let people find your contact information, is it on there, Matthew?
Yes, I believe it's there, but I can also add my email in the chat here too. But
if you want to drop your email in the chat, that would be great. And
yes.
then we'll pass that along. Right now, that's the only question I would say to people. If you have questions or comments or particular issues that you would like our presenters to address, please put those in the Q&A and they will get to them as soon as they can. Don't put your answer in the Q&A, Matthew. I'll take care of that because we have a special way of doing that. Just
Okay.
If you go to the chat and send it to everybody, we'll get it out.
Okay.
Perfect. Carry on, Andrew.
Yeah, well, I can't believe that you made me admit in a recorded broadcast that there were times when we flipped through a directory and just tried to fill a position in the
You
church.
didn't admit, I admitted that. I covered for you. I know you never did that. You never did that. That was me.
Oh no. That's just about all of us. So we're going to talk now about the new realities that we believe that we're facing, and how that affects what we've discovered about trying to engage people. So let me go back to my desktop and I'll begin to share. Here's some more of the information you probably came for tonight to help you to understand where you are and how you can move forward. So here are some of the new realities that we believe that we are facing as a group, and how we have to move through them. So the first one is this. 2 years after the pandemic, people are older, they're scared, and they're sick. And by that, I mean that in a number of different ways. But I would say that we talk as a staff a lot of times about how the past 2 years have felt more like 5 or 8 years. And especially for our older folks, it has worn deeply on them. The isolation, the lack of the kinds of ways that they were able to operate, and the lack of stimulation for some of them has just been, in some cases, devastating. And so we've had to watch for that. And we're going to talk about that more later. Pastor Brendan's going to talk about that more later. But that's a new reality that that pervades a lot of the thinking here. And in our community, our folks have been super careful. We are in one of the highest vaccinated counties in the nation. Early on, we were higher vaccinated than anybody else, and that still didn't stop people from being concerned or afraid or take precautions. So we needed to do ministry living in that reality instead of fighting it. The second thing is, and this is a new reality that we're living into, and that is people need flexibility and understanding. So let me open that up and talk about that for just a second. People need flexibility and understanding. As we move into our world, and we'll talk more about this later on, but the great resignation that's being talked about in the news as so many people are leaving their jobs, I think has also happened in some cases in the church. And one of the things that we've learned is that we need to be flexible with the way that we engage our people. So the first thing is we go to committee chairs and we say to them, if you don't have to meet, don't meet. Don't have a meeting just to have a meeting. Now, different churches have different cultures around that. And for our church, it was pretty customary that there were seasons where there was business to take care of. But especially during COVID, there were sometimes 2-3 months at a time when the SPRC just didn't need to meet. And I would say to them, there's value in connecting. So after missing 2 or 3 meetings, we get together just to have people connect, but virtually. But if we didn't have to meet, we didn't do it. And that was helpful to people. The second thing that we're living under with regard to flexibility and understanding is to begin to tell people it's okay if you can't come to a particular meeting, right? It may be that you are unable to make a meeting. And I talked to a dear soul recently who travels a lot for work. And they had taken a red eye, gotten in at 2 a.m, and was at the church at 8 a.m. to serve as a greeter because they had committed to doing it. And I had to say to them, it's okay if if you let us know and we work that out. We're trying very hard to know where people are and to have flexibility and understanding about that. Another thing that we're telling people is there are times when it's better to send certain reports ahead in writing and let people read them than to have to sit through them all. So for example, on our SPRC, oftentimes Pastor Brenda and I will write up our pastor's report, we'll send it to the chairperson, they will email it out ahead of time, and we'll just do the highlights. And we've gone to meetings that are closer to 45 minutes than to an hour and 15. And we're finding that that's a real sweet spot for people, that keeping things under an hour seems to be a real blessing to them. And to do that requires us having some flexibility and doing things differently. Next, if you meet in person, also offer a hybrid opportunity. And I don't just mean worship, and many of you probably already do this. But for us, our intentionality is that as we continue to move forward, those teams that are beginning to meet in person, we're asking them to put a laptop on the table, to set up a Zoom meeting, and to Zoom people in. Because for some people, the opportunity to be able to Zoom into a meeting, even if other people are there in person, number one, gives them a level of comfort. But number two, means that they don't have 20 minutes of travel on both sides of that meeting, plus the after meeting conversations that happen, and they're more willing to be a part. Our flexibility allows them to be more willing to say yes to the questions that we're asking. The last one I want to say on this is to be creative, Now, I'm going to, we got a lot more materials to cover tonight, but I'm just going to pause here because our council meetings, like many of you, are not always exciting. But I said to Pastor Brenda and Pastor Kathy, who attend council meetings. I said, you know what? We have a conversation that we're supposed to have tonight. And I wonder what would happen on Zoom. I wonder what would happen if we move people into breakout groups instead of trying to have a giant conversation and have them engage. In this case, it was a conversation on race. Have them engage in conversations in breakout rooms. Would you two of you share how different it was to have that happen?
When we are in Zoom meetings, and we all know this now because we are all Zooming all the time, it is sometimes difficult to engage in large group conversations, especially with more sensitive topics where the idea is really to get at your heart, but maybe you don't want to share it in that kind of situation, and with so many people. And so the breakout room really, because there were only 3 or 4 of us in conversation, really helped us to answer the question more quickly, to get at the heart of the matter more quickly, and really brought a lot of energy and creativity to the conversation that I don't think would have happened if we had stayed in a large group.
I affirm
Pastor
that.
Brenda?
It made people feel more comfortable. I think people felt like it was a safe environment and that they didn't have to be as concerned as to how people would react to what it was they were sharing. And so therefore, I believe that made for a much richer conversation around that very sensitive topic and allowed people also time to be able to speak, because when you have a large group, unfortunately, you have some who are more comfortable with speaking and will continue to speak and speak, which then minimizes the amount of time that others would have an opportunity to share.
Yeah, it created some rich conversation to have in regards to not just that topic, but other things that we've done with regards to that. And so get creative. I mean, another way to do that is, you can, unless you have a really small group, if you have a group of 8 or 10 people, doing a poll will get people that are normally quiet to voice an opinion. Right. And just getting them engaged on that level helps them to be able to participate in a way that they may not otherwise do. So let me go back to this so that we can kind of finish up this particular section. The next reality that we found that we were facing was new priorities. And what I mean by that is that we were discovering that as people went through COVID, their priorities began to change. And that was a shift that took place over time. And we talked about the Great Resignation, but we found that people, their priorities with regard to work, their priorities with regard to home, their priorities with regard to how they're going to spend their time and who they're going to spend it with really changed dramatically. And we had people telling us that they weren't sure that they could commit the same time that they had committed in the past. They weren't sure that they could wear all the same hats, that they weren't sure that they were able to be there as often or as many with as many things as they had in the past. And that caused us to rethink the balance, the leadership, the ways, the kinds of responsibilities that we were putting on people, to have a sensitivity to this, because we wanted to understand where they were coming from, and also hear that for some of them, this was an issue of spiritual, mental, and emotional health, and physical health. And so some of them were saying, look, I've been burning the candle at both ends, and I now feel completely exhausted. And if I try and continue at the pace I was at before all of this happened, I will not function well. And so we had to begin to listen to people and to hear their hearts and to sense that those priorities were shifting, and try not to get defensive about it or to say, well, it's us, or they don't like their church anymore, or any of those kinds of things, because that really wasn't it at all. We were sensing that something important was happening in them, and it was becoming an important spiritual moment. And you'll see in some of the materials that we share in a couple of minutes how we were then able to take that and shift some things that we do to take advantage of that. Their new priorities actually were not all bad things. And so some of them were practicing no Sabbath rest at all, and now they were. Some of them were not spending time with their kids, and now they were. And those, I'll tell you, Kathy Vidic was excited to hear that parents were spending as much time with their kids as they were, that they were helping them with their schoolwork and spending time with them outside and seeing what was happening to them in school and what they were being taught and what they were watching on television and all of those kinds of things. And so those things really changed the nature of what was happening inside of our folks and caused us to shift, especially to the next area that I want to talk about. And I'm going to ask Pastor Brenda to weigh in on this when I've walked this through, because she's done a lot of calling and a lot of talking to the folks in our church, and she experienced this a lot first. As I went through nominations this year as the chairperson, I noticed that a lot more people were saying no. And they were saying no for some of the reasons I just went over, and for some of these reasons. And as we were walking it through, I realized that, and I told the nominations committee, we need to stop selling the position, stop selling that we need somebody to do this thing, and begin listening more. And so we began to move and shift toward a care for the person first piece, where we said, before we ask somebody to do something, we're going to first care for them and find out where they are. Because the weird thing about the time that we're going through is that, 1 week somebody can be doing pretty well, and the next week they can be doing very poorly. There was a lot of death. There was a lot of change. There were a lot of challenges. And so caring for that person first, when we would make calls, we would not even lead with, I'm calling on behalf of the nominations committee, or I'm calling, we need somebody to substitute in children's ministry. We would begin by asking them where they were. And then we would also help them evaluate the commitment. We would walk them through and say, if we're going to ask you to do something, let's be honest about it. Because sometimes we say, oh, it'll be fine. You'll adjust and you'll like it. We're not really honest in evaluating the commitment level for them. Sorry, that T went to the next line. The program does that. And as we called people, we also found that many of them were either encountering tremendous successes at their job, they were getting promoted, they were having all kinds of new responsibilities. I had 3 people tell me on finance committee, I would really like to do this, Pastor, but I just got a new position. I've got so much more responsibility. I just can't do it right now. And then we had other people that were on just the opposite end. They had lost a job. They had faced economic uncertainty, which caused them a lot of anxiety, and they were not ready to deal with that. And then there was exhaustion. There were people who were they couldn't do one more thing. They just couldn't. It was enough just to conquer the anxiety of going to the grocery store and get the food that they needed for them to just survive, that they weren't thinking about, how do I help the church stream their worship service? And the last thing was family needs, right? And that was all kinds of new family needs cropped up. And that happened for some of our older folks who felt like they couldn't get out to the grocery store. How do they get the stuff that they need? And how is their family helping them? To families with little kids who their parents suddenly had to choose when they were going to work and how they were going to work, and working at home. There was an enormous amount of stuff. So, Pastor Brenda, I'm just going to pause because I know that you spent a lot of time listening to folks. And this became very important to you. That's been a huge ministry for you and all of us.
So one of the easiest ways that I've been able to engage members in the congregation was something I had begun just prior to COVID, but was very instrumental during COVID. And that was making birthday calls. Calling people on their birthday to let them know that we were thinking about them, wanted to wish them a very blessed birthday, and hope that they were doing something exciting to celebrate. And during COVID, it became almost an expectancy, if you will, for some of the members that they were going to get a phone call from their church to wish them happy birthday, even during COVID. And so it was also an opportunity to learn how they were doing, to learn whether or not times had changed enough for family to be able to come. Some would have a lunch on the back porch or in the yard where they could socially distance and be able to enjoy one another. Others were able to have members within their particular retirement community to come and go on a patio or a larger space to be able to help them celebrate in some small way. And their being able to share those joys in the midst of the challenges was very encouraging. And so that provided an open door. It also was an opportunity to find out whether or not they needed anything, whether they needed assistance, if you will, with being able to get something basic as groceries, if you will. And so while we didn't have our physical food pantry, we pivoted. And so we went to using grocery cart so that people would still be able to get the items they needed. And because COVID had moved grocery stores into providing more delivery services, it made it a little easier for them to receive some of the much needed items. So in that, there's also opportunities for them to also share that they were watching the services, what they liked about the services, whether there was something they'd like to see us add, but also an opportunity to say, that might be something that I might be interested in doing. There were those when we were doing the larger Canvas calls who said that they appreciated receiving phone calls, that they volunteered to help us make phone calls to other individuals, which was a way for them to be engaged and feel like they were a part of the life and the ministry of the congregation. It was also an opportunity to have individuals to be little co-champions, if you will, little community leaders, because we do have certain retirement facilities where we have a group of individuals that are members of the church. And so they felt like they had an important role to also make sure that those members in their community were doing well, or whether they needed anything, and were able to relay that information. Because it's difficult, as you know, being in ministry many times, we don't get information in regards to people who may need surgery, people who have had unfortunate falls, and things of this nature. And this is another way of being able to receive that information. So an easy way for an open door to be able to find ways to engage people in the life of the church.
And Matthew, you had a college student, Samantha, who was doing a lot of video editing for you. And one of the things that you had to watch was just that you had to be sensitive to the time in the semester that she was working, because we needed her a lot at Christmas and she had finals.
Yes, and she was one of the folks that are your yes people who are just really willing and wanting to help as much as possible. And what you tend to do is lean on them a lot, especially when you have a lot of things going on. And you just have to be conscious of that, right? Just as you have to unload things, just as I have to unload things off of my plate because I have a lot, because I have a lot on it, you want to make sure that you're not putting that same pressure on those people, even if they're not saying it, because they may not be saying it, but they will definitely be thinking it. And their loved ones, you know what I mean? Her mom, I wanted to be very conscious of how her mom feels about the responsibilities that she's taking on, that she can handle it. And so you have to be thinking about that for sure.
Yeah. And Kathy, we went through a period of time where up to very recently, where you wondered if you were going to have enough volunteers just to do safe sanctuary style stuff.
Yes. And so a lot of things have helped in that. One of them we're getting ready to talk to about how to keep things simple. Also, we are blessed in many ways, but in my ministry area, to have 2 or 3 key leaders who, if I just shifted the way I saw how I did scheduling, I could invite in more youth to help and be safe sanctuary compliant. And it's still a growing process. Not all of our leaders, I don't anticipate that all of them will come back. So it's a matter of shifting how I think about it in order to accomplish what needs to be done.
Yeah. So we've got two more realities that we've discovered that I want to try and walk us through, because these next two, I think, were just as challenging as some of the things that we just talked about. The next is that excitement was harder. It was harder to create excitement. And so, one of the ways that you get people to serve or to engage is to create excitement. And because of that, they oftentimes would be willing to say yes because there was a need or something that that they could clearly help with. And so we found these things to be true that were a challenge to just creating excitement. Number one, the old traditions did not create the same excitement. So simply doing some of the things that people love to do did not create excitement. And so that was huge, right? We couldn't count on the fact that people were going to rush to the church to hang the greens just because it's Christmas. They did not get excited about that. And that was an important learning for us. The next thing was understanding the importance of being clearly missional versus just doing something new. And so they would ask questions like, how does this help others? How are we affecting our world? Is this worth our time? And those became important questions for us. And so we said, the places we're trying to engage people, is there an important purpose to it? Or are we just trying to do something that we did in the past to fulfill a calendar item or something else? And we were more pointed about those things, and that created more of a willingness for people to serve. Thirdly, we found that being clearly focused versus being broad. And so along the same line as the missional versus the new, to be pretty specific about what we were actually trying to do and trying to accomplish was really important. So we found, probably as many of you did, that when we had a food drive and it lasted for a certain time and people could drop off stuff, that they weren't exposed to a lot of the people. We have a portico with automatic doors at one part of the church. We put a table in there. We tell them a time. They'd come in. Nobody else would be there. They'd drop their stuff off. The automatic doors would open and close. They'd leave. They supported that in huge ways in the middle of the pandemic. And we had to be very focused about it. Instead of just saying we're trying to feed people, we said, we're asking you to do this. When you go to the grocery store, pick up a couple extra things, bring them in, drop them off at this table. And they were willing to do that and to engage in that way. The last thing that we learned about excitement being harder was that people were dealing with a lot of grief. And when you're grieving over things, it's really hard to be excited. And so for many people, worship was not the same, and they were grieving that. Fellowship was not the same, and they were grieving that. Traditions were not the same. They had friends pass away. There was the same members, if you're in person, that were attending in the past or not all attending now. And so we began to have to be sensitive to these issues around what will create excitement. And as Pastor Brenda said, sometimes having a small meal, carefully spaced, will draw United Methodist with excitement. Food still excites people. And so we were looking for those places that we could make those kinds of things happen. Pastor Kathy did an amazing job this year with a trunk or treat. We had an outdoor trunk or treat where nearly over 300 people showed up from the community. And the people that had their trunks there were so excited, but it was missional, it was helping other people, and it was clearly focused. And those things allowed people to be excited enough to show up and to help. And so we didn't offer 20 things. We'll talk about that later. We focused more on these aspects to create a level of excitement that would help people to engage. The last reality that we are facing is that there are new people that are attending. There are new people that are attending online, and if you use Zoom, then you may have a better sense of that because you have to send out a link. But if you're doing something on Facebook Live or on YouTube that you're putting out there, you don't always even know. One day, I was walking across the parking lot, and a person I've never met in my life before rolled down their window on a Wednesday and yelled, "Hey, Pastor Andrew." And I thought to myself, I have no idea who you are. And they said, well, you and Pastor Brenda and Pastor Kathy and Matthew, you guys are superheroes to our kids because they're watching you on our TV at home. We had no idea. And so there are new people that are connecting to us, some of whom are online and some of whom are in person. And because of the nature of what we're facing right now, we don't always know who they are. We don't always know what their interests are, if they're willing to serve, if they want to get connected. And that's a whole nother reality that we're facing in terms of trying to engage them. All of these things are what led us to our last section, which are the new rules. And this is really the meat of what we can give to you. That's kind of the hard lessons that we've learned. But before I do that, Bill, are there any questions that we need to address at this point in time?
You all are setting a record for the least number of questions of any Training Tuesday because you're explaining everything so well. So
okay, I hope that's true.
I'm going to put it out there. If you all have an issue that you'd like this team to help you address, you get your private consultation right now. And I know the one thing that does go through people's minds at times like this, Andrew, is, well, how easy it must be for you. Look at all of this staff that you have, and it's just me by myself. And I know that it's not easy. And so I just want to kind of stress that for everybody, it doesn't matter what your size is, everybody has their own unique challenges. But what I'm hearing from all four of you is some of these principles can be applied to any size congregation. So don't let the size of a worshiping congregation or a staff size scare you off from trying to implement some of these principles. It's good stuff. So keep it up.
So to that point, and both Pastor Kathy and Pastor Brenda have like me served in smaller churches. There are different challenges, but the challenges that all of us are facing right now are like, we had church conference and my slate of nominations for SPRC still is not completely full. We do not have 9 people on SPRC right now. The trustees still want one more person, so it really, you two can speak to that as well. I know Kathy and Brenda, you have the next 2 sections, so you can jump into that as well when you address those. But we have about 20 minutes left. I'm gonna, Kathy, do you want me to put up the piece for the new rules?
Sure, if you'd like.
Okay, so Kathy's gonna talk about the first one, and Pastor Brenda's gonna talk about the second one. So the new rules, here are some things that we've learned with regard to it. So the first one is keep it simple. And Kathy, would you talk about that? I'll enlarge that for a second.
We, because of everything that Andrew has just spent time speaking to, the exhaustion of people in the congregation and the exhaustion of people who were leaders, their shifts in priorities, their shift in time, because of our own ability or inability to do it all. None of us can do that, no matter what size church we have. We had become a church that had filled almost every single minute of a Sunday with something. And what COVID gave us, I think, was the gift of being able to sit down and examine what is important and keeping it simple and streamlined to the important things. Missional was key in re-engaging people from the very beginning. How can I help others? Worship is another area that we focus on in keeping it simple. So overall, we work really hard not to have our programming overlap or become exhausting to anyone, so that it still allows people an ease of entry. The events themselves became very simple. Pastor Andrew talked about the trunk or treat event. We do so little for that event. We asked people to come to an outside event to set up their trunks, decorate them, and pass out candy in whatever way they felt comfortable with their kids. We asked them to mask the whole time, and they were just so thrilled to be happy and to see kids in the community and to engage that way. But that was a very simple event and a very simple ask. We were able to deliver monthly deliveries to our kids enrolled in our Sunday school program, and those were family activities to help families stay engaged with each other, with a focus on service and mission and discipleship. And the delivery team was simple asks. Could you take these boxes to these families today? What we learned is that it became impossible during COVID for us to imagine something going long term. And our energy levels, all of our energy levels were being drained. And so it was impossible to imagine stepping into that role. So what we began to realize is that we really had to break tasks down and invite for specific asks for short-term commitments in a way that people felt good about saying yes to. Yes, I can make those 5 deliveries between here and here, and I'm happy to do that for you. We are beginning to see some momentum in the return of people to our Sunday morning worship services, to other programming, as Pastor Brenda has talked about. And so in our past, we had a huge brunch with Santa event that we invited our whole community to. And it was a deal, if you know what I mean, a big deal. I drove by a sign of a church near us who was doing it. And I just thought, I don't feel the need to do that this year just because someone else is doing it, but I do feel like we need to engage families in some way. So what is it, is it Christmas caroling in the neighborhoods? Is it what can it be? And where we landed with that is to have a Christmas caroling event in our back parking lot that families can come to, and the youth group is making s'mores, and Matthew's leading us in Christmas carols, and but simple. Still, it feels simple. It feels to people who have shifting priorities, who are, even though it is a pandemic, seem to be overcommitted in ways with their schedule again. It feels like a simple thing that people can come to and engage in. We also have learned that we need to break tasks down. So the hanging of the greens for this year, because we are back in person, we did feel the need to have some sign that it was Advent coming up. And instead of trying to tackle it as with our worship committee, the tasks were broken down, and then groups were invited to participate in them. So the choir was asked if they would be willing to hang a certain number of wreaths in a certain area where they would know where they go. A small group was asked to decorate the Christmas tree. There were a few other groups that were invited to do other certain special things that helped us have a full hanging of the greens, though it was in part. It was very accessible and very easy for people to give themselves to. And I think it brought them joy because it seemed so easy and allowed them space to breathe during that. So we make it easy by supplying everything a group or a person might need to do the task. For the deliveries that were made in my ministry area, they had the people's names, addresses, and directions from MapQuest, so they knew where to go where and what to do next. So simple is how we have been able to step people back in to into engaging with community in a meaningful way.
Thank you. I think that's that's been a challenge for us to figure some of that stuff out. It took energy, but we found that people actually, groups enjoyed decorating their section of the church together. It became a small community activity instead of just saying to the congregation, would you stay after church or would you come early and set stuff up? And it really ended up changing the way that we're doing things overall.
Can I add something to she mentioned worship and the overall program of how we ran things. When we didn't have the best equipment. Actually, throughout the whole time when we were just strictly online, we did not have the best equipment. We were keeping it simple, staying along those same lines of keeping it simple. We allowed people, if we were going to ask their children to do prayers for the services, if we were going to ask if Pastor Kathy was going to do a children's message, or Pastor Brenda was going to do something, we allowed them to do it, from their homes. We didn't have a setting that we required everybody to come in and say, hey, let me put you on the schedule so you can come into the church to do it. Do it right from your home. Do it from your phone. And we gave them instructions. We were specific, like turn your phone to the side, so that it's landscape and not portrait. And even if we had, a couple times where it wasn't correct, we tried not to put the stress on people that it needed to be perfect. And they very much appreciated that. And, they enjoyed the online services that we put together. As Pastor Andrew said, people who we never met really appreciated all that we had done for them. And I think that's the challenge, is that we think we have to have, the best cameras or the microphone to plug into the camera. And then when you add that, you got to have the soundboard. No, just keeping it simple really goes a long way, the little things, right?
I think that's across the board, Matthew. Thank you for bringing that up. But we always, and we tend to think that we need the best in order to, or the whatever our huge vision is, that it can only be that. And what I believe I've certainly learned in my ministry area, is that mostly it's about the relationship that's happening during the building, whether that's with a kid, an adult, a family, a servant leader, or the community. And so if we keep the focus on that being the most important thing, everything else kind of falls into place.
Yeah. Pastor Bennett, we're going to talk next about caring first. And we touched on it a little bit earlier, but the notion of caring first for folks as we move in the ministry as a way to engage them was really an important learning. And so you and I, so we have two pastors here on Sunday morning, which for many churches is a huge luxury. But you and I used to both be in worship, and now one of us is standing out in the lobby greeting everybody to be able to connect with folks rather than sitting up on the platform all the time.
Yes. So that has been important. So normally most churches would have greeters or ushers. So we switched and realized that we would have a broader reach if the one who was responsible for the sermon would be responsible for all of the components of that worship experience, which then freed the other to be able to engage and to greet and welcome visitors as well as members to the worship experience. This truly brought joy to a lot of people. For newcomers to come and to be able to be greeted by one of the pastors when they first enter the church says that we care about them, that we are not so preoccupied that they have to wait until after the service and we're done everything in regards to that in order to be able to meet us, to know our names, and to also learn a little more about the congregation itself. We also have individuals who are there to welcome them, to also let them know as to where our Sunday school area is, if there was a family who has nursery needs, is being there, engaging, taking into account their needs as either someone who is new or maybe someone who is returning, but may have a little more challenge navigating things. And so we try to do that because they want to feel that they are important as someone else who may be in leadership. And a lot of those who are working and have continued to help us make things happen have not necessarily been people in leadership, but have been laity. I see it. Thank you. The other important piece in caring first is to make sure that we're listening and not being the one to be doing all of the talking. In that, we also have an opportunity to learn a lot of things. And as Pastor Andrew had stated earlier, a lot of members had dealt with a lot of loss. The loss of not having their family network close, not having individuals who used to provide certain care for them there, as well as the physical human loss of family members and friends, and not having the opportunity to celebrate that particular individual's life in a way that had been familiar, which helped them in the grieving process. So part of caring first includes being able to meet people where they are, to be able to let them know that you have a listening ear, that we're here to help you in ways that we can. I mentioned just a simple pivot of having canned goods in a food pantry to being able to have grocery store gift cards to send out. Some of the other things that came to my attention are other needs. People go in, they have surgery, they come home, and they feel like there's no one there or no one remembers them after that actual day of surgery. And so we've put some things in place where we send what's considered to be a congregational encouragement to them when we have that information. We also are beginning to put into place a new component to help individuals who found themselves thrown into the position of being a caregiver to loved ones, something they had not done before because they were able to have others who could do that for them. It's also being able to recognize they need care as well. And so we're looking to kick off a pilot that is dealing with respite care offerings to members. One of the other important segments is we have members in the congregations who are retired nurses, retired teachers, those who enjoy being in community with others. And so we're also going to begin a buddy system where we will have members of the congregation who will be a buddy to someone else who may be homebound, so that they know that they're going to receive a phone call from that individual, that they will be able to schedule a visit, of course, within the parameters that COVID would allow, but to be able to care for the individual as well as the family on several different levels. There's a form of engagement as well as continued encouragement, but more so they can stay connected to the body of Christ.
All really important stuff. I'm going to spend just a second highlighting the communicate and the team dynamics because I want to spend more time on the one step closer. And then Matthew's going to talk about the ask for less. In the communicate, I simply want to say to you that we need to use many forms to communicate. And we sent out a letter to our people a week and a half ago, and none of them have gotten it. So in terms of connecting and getting people to respond, it's an interesting dynamic because in your congregation, you're going to have its own culture. And some of you have people that don't even have email. And some of you have people that check their email once a week. And some people have 60 emails a day and they're tired of reading them. And some people have joined into social media and newly formed there. So getting to know your congregation, assuming that people are not listening, we are assuming that they're not hearing us. So we are trying to say it as many times in as many different ways as possible to get them to engage, hoping that they'll hear it at least once, causing us to simplify our message. The team dynamics piece, what I want to say about that in simple is that in the past, we have not always had to worry about whether the team dynamics were healthy. But the level of stress that people are under, we now have to start thinking about that. And we have to think about how we're running our meetings and how people are interacting, because sometimes it's the smallest thing that can tip a person over and really affect dynamics inside of a church in a long-term fashion. But one of the most important things we've learned is this principle that we call one step closer. And that is, how do we take people where they are and get them one step closer? Just one step closer. So by that, what we mean is, how do we get them connected to each other? How do we get them connected in worship? And how do we get them connected in some form of a meeting? And by that, sometimes it's fellowship and sometimes it's just for a purpose, right? And so we ask the question a lot, where is a person? And how do we get them one step closer? How do we get them, if they're not doing anything, to attend online? How do we get them to attend something in person, right? And so Pastor Brenda has had friends call friends to invite them to a lunch just to get them one step closer. Getting outdoor events, creating small events to in-person worship, making it easy for them to do that, reaching out to them instead of expecting that they're reading the newsletter or the email or whatever it is. And sometimes we also ask for feedback, especially in a worship service. If you are hybrid, you should regularly be asking the people that are watching you to give you feedback online and having somebody monitor it. The pastor who is out in the fellowship hall, but you can ask a layperson to do this, have someone watch your service live as you're doing it. Now, if you're on Zoom, this is less important because you see it yourself. But if you're on Facebook, sometimes, depending upon the device that you're on, the sound, the video is not always good. So getting people just to tell you, hey, the sound's not good, is engaging them and getting them to take one step closer and getting them to go to that one place. And that's become a huge theme for us. Matthew, you want to talk about ask, but ask for less, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, and I'll do this really quickly. I'm gonna start with get people started, because I think that has more to do with us, and how we get people started in doing things. And I think that, simply put, is we have to be the first partakers, right? Like we have, when it came to technology, I was the one that was learning the technology. I was the one that was, programming the services, and figuring out how to use the new soundboard and asking people to take that journey with me. But they didn't have to figure this out as much as I was going to help them. That I was going to be there. I was going to be a support for them. And I also, during the time where we were getting people back into in-person service, we had a young lady by the name of Alicia, who was also knowledgeable of things, of how to use things like ProPresenter, to help people along, to help volunteers along the way, so that they didn't feel, and there were still some days where you feel flustered, where you feel like, okay, we got to figure this out. But the support, knowing that your leaders are there, that are going to help you support or walk you through the things that you're going to do. There's a principle that my wife was always pushing into me was under ask and over appreciate. Under ask and over appreciate, meaning don't ask for too much, because in the back of everyone's mind, no matter what you're asking them to do, the question is how much time is gonna do I have to take out of my schedule to do it, right? And you have to make sure that you're not taking out huge blocks of time out of people's time to do certain tasks, and because during COVID, their priorities shifted. Even our own priorities shifted, right? Like and you have to be mindful of that. You have to be sensitive of that, and you want them to know that you're thinking about those things, right? That you don't want them that you're not asking them to give, to change their entire schedule to learn a program that you guys are using, or to be in worship, or to be at an event. But as you are able, and then not only that, over appreciating, letting them know how much that you appreciated their help. Sending a card goes a long way. Sending a card goes a long way, and letting people know that you appreciate the time, no matter how small, and no matter how small or how big that they put into trying to make to be a part of what's going on around the church. And give things a trial period. Once at the amount of volunteers that I have now, we're doing things in one service that we weren't doing before. And if we were doing the one service, I would say the amount of volunteers that we have now, I wish I had this many volunteers before COVID. But now that we are expanding what we do in both services, we're trying to have media and we got a new sound system for both services. We don't quite have as many volunteers as we need, and so as we would like. But the ones that we do have, I tell them, we've tried telling them, hey, why don't we try for this a period of time having everybody do both services once a month. Let's see how that goes for a while. And while we're doing this, why don't you let's help each other. Let's help the team by recruiting, going in the congregation, finding people who are kind of have a knowledge of doing technology, and recruit them. Tell them to come back in the back and sit in the back. Now that can be a challenge sometimes, because there's a lot of talking that goes on back there, and we're not in the box back there, so you can sometimes hear the conversations that are going on. But I think that having that in your mind about asking for less, letting people know that we're not asking you to change your whole life for this, but to and we appreciate the little bit that you're doing goes a long way.
Thank you, Bill. The last thing that we would say is that as you start back in person, like, we have been intentional about having shorter worship services. Our worship services are intentionally 45 minutes or so, because people's attention span is just different. And so we are trying to adjust as we start back in person to the culture and the things that are happening. So I know that we're out of time. We're actually over time. We'd be happy to stay if people have questions. I don't know. The Zoom call may just shut down in 30 seconds on us. I don't know.
If I slip and hit the end, it will shut off, but we've got time if people want to stay on. We have a couple of questions that I thought were really important. You've got a lot of great information. I want to suggest a friend of mine, I'm going to do a shout out to our conference lay leader, Dolores Martin. She has been at every single training Tuesday for the last 3 years. And she has decided that she is going to take the video from tonight, once it's available, and show it to her church council and spend a meeting just dissecting this information with her church council. It's that good. So thank you all very much for taking the time to present with us. One question that came in, one of our participants is in a small congregation. He's feeling a little overwhelmed by all of this information. Where's a place that a pastor of a small church could start with? What's the one thing they should start with?
Keep it simple. Really. Like, ask what's the minimum you have to do to bless people and get people started on that thing, right? And for us, we do have a lot of staff for the average church, and yet we were all running full tilt all the time, because even though you have more staff, we have more people we had to serve. And so it is harder because you don't have the same support of people around you. So just in the same way, I think keep it simple.
And one other question, but it's in two parts. Part one, what was the greatest challenge adjusting to the new reality?
I'm going to let one of you guys take the first shot at that.
I would say one of the greatest challenges was, as always, giving ourselves grace as we give others grace. But I think for myself, it's helping people to discover that we have a great opportunity to form our own new normal. Sometimes we get lost in trying to get back to what we used to have or how it used to be, that sometimes we miss some of the opportunities to do some of those things that we said we'd always like to try.
For me, it was to stop using the past as a measuring stick and to just learn to be grateful for every little step forward, whatever forward looks like in that situation, but for every little engagement, to be grateful for that.
For me, it was, realizing that that everything wasn't going to be perfect on a Sunday, whether it be in person or online, that there were going to be some challenges. But it was, also realizing that, it doesn't have to be, right? Like, I mentioned that, Pastor Kathy used to put her children, just to ask the children to do prayers and stuff. And we didn't always hear them. And I would, we didn't always hear, because parents would take the videos outside and you could hear cars going behind them. But I think that the people were more blessed to see the children on the screen and not care actually what's coming out of their mouth. But, that actually is what actually blessed them. And I think, with me not having to have in-person music, figuring that out, right? Like, it wasn't going to be perfect. Not everyone was going to play in time, just patience, right? Patience and understanding that, that it's a learning curve, and that God, that God is just, creating opportunities for to do to experience new things in different ways.
Bill, I would also say that, to follow up on what Matthew just said, is that, like, instead of seeing everything as a problem, to say, what can we do with this? Right? And there were things we couldn't do anything about, right? But like the emotional weight of, oh no, another thing just went wrong is just huge. And it takes a toll on you, right? And instead of me walking around saying another thing went wrong, I said, okay, well, what can we do about this that can do something new? And how can we use this as an opportunity? And I think that became emotionally, like, it lifted a lot of weight off of me. And that, it took me a while to get there, but that was a huge shift for me.
So you had to say, Andrew, what could go wrong as my fire alarms begin to go off because somebody's cooking upstairs. You really want one of those fire alarms that just says, I'm cooking bacon, and that would shut it off, but they're taking care of it. Last question, how have the church members adjusted to your new community outreach process? You talked about everything being missional, that if we're going to do this, it has to bless somebody. How have people adjusted to that?
I would say people have responded far beyond my greatest expectations. They were happy to be able to be a part of a bigger plan, to look at other ways. When we were talking about the food drive, we combined it with another opportunity. So for the Lenten season, they were able to pick up a Lenten kit when they came to the church as they brought their canned goods for the food drive. So it was encouragement, as well as feeling that they were giving as well as receiving. And so also realizing that just because the church doors were closed, our hearts weren't closed, and that we were still able to bless people. And that gave them the greatest joy and encouragement.
Thank you, Britta. I like that. I really believe the church never closed. Our buildings may have closed, but the church
Yes.
never closed. And the other thing you all said that I think we need to take away tonight is the gift that this season has brought some of us to look at our schedules differently and make decisions to stop doing things we thought we always had to do. On that note, just a couple of announcements. First of all, again, thank you all very much for taking the time to stick with us, for taking the time to present with us tonight. I appreciate it so much. We've got 2 more Training Tuesdays left in our fall season. Next Tuesday is Cultivating Healthy Relationships, a holistic approach to the work of the Staff Parish Relations Committee. And on December 14th is One Board, the gifts of a simplified, accountable structure for such a time as this. Each annual conference can register at your individual annual conference website, and you'll want to join us for those last 2 Training Tuesdays of the fall season. Again, Andrew and Brenda and Matthew, and I know Kathy had to step off. Thank you all very much for taking the time to present and sharing with us tonight. For our audience, thank you so much for participating and hanging in there with us. The video and the presentation will be available later this week. Have a blessed evening. Bye now.